Welcome in to CBS News 24/7. I'm Elizabeth Cook. The White House Rose Garden will be the venue for a major tariff announcement from President Trump later today. After teasing it for weeks, Trump is expected to announce sweeping reciprocal tariffs on countries across the globe. And the markets are on high alert. We are closely watching Wall Street for reaction, with investors getting closer to some clarity in all this. And we're also tracking prices here at home and looking at how this announcement could impact our ports. Meanwhile, countries across the world are bracing for this news. We are waiting for reaction at our northern and southern borders and abroad. Let's go deeper with the team on the ground, starting with CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman. Willie, great to be with you. The White House keeping these details pretty close to the vest. What do we know?
Hey there, Liz. Good to be with you as well. That's right. The White House hasn't released many details about what the president will announce today, but we know that he has been talking about this for weeks. Those reciprocal tariffs on nations across the globe. There were questions as to whether or not it would be 10 or 15 nations. The president essentially said it could be all the nations that have tariffs on U.S. goods. But we do know that White House officials have been talking about 10 or 15 nations or so who have the greatest trade deficits with the United States as perhaps a target for these reciprocal tariffs. Now, remember, this builds on other tariffs that the president has announced, including tariffs on foreign-made automobiles at 25%. That's set to go into effect tomorrow when the United States will start collecting money on those tariffs. And I'll note that the U.S. could collect billions of dollars worth on those auto tariffs alone, some $60 to $65 billion over a year on those auto tariffs. Now, this could potentially raise prices, and the president expressed that he's not necessarily concerned about it. These tariffs, specifically the auto tariffs, raising prices on consumers, noting that that could potentially mean that American consumers will switch to buying American-made vehicles. But we do, of course, know that announcement set to happen at 4 p.m. today. That is perhaps by design, because that's when the markets close, essentially. So we'll be waiting to see the details during that Rose Garden event, Liz.
Yeah, we know that other countries are going to be watching for this announcement, Willie, but what about companies across the country? How are they bracing for this announcement that could definitely impact them?
Yeah, it's not just consumers, it's businesses as well. As you mentioned, businesses perhaps preparing for this. Maybe they're buying things in advance in anticipation that prices will go up, because that would certainly mean increased costs with these tariffs. It could also perhaps mean supply chain disruption. On top of that, cost to reshore production as well. As you see the list of things that companies have to handle. In addition to that, limited domestic alternatives and those retaliatory tariffs that some nations, including Canada and Mexico, which have already announced retaliatory tariffs on U.S. made goods. So even if you produce those goods here in America and sell to American consumers, if you want to sell overseas, sell to other nations, the prices could be raised there, affecting your bottom line. So a lot at stake here. A lot of business leaders and consumers, I will note, watching closely for this announcement today that the president is set to make.
Yeah, there is so much at stake, Willie, and it's worth noting that no CEOs are expected to be at the White House Rose Garden event today, but we do know that Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook, or Meta, is going to be there today. What do we know about that meeting?
Yeah, we got word that Mark Zuckerberg is here at the White House complex. We don't yet know if he's meeting with the president. That could perhaps happen. We'll note that he has met with the president in the past, but a Meta spokesperson, I should say, sent us a statement saying Mark's continuing the meetings he's been holding with the administration on American technology leadership. So we anticipate that we could perhaps learn more information about his meeting here, but at least for now, Liz, not necessarily a meeting with the president. It could happen, but we do know that he is here at the White House. All
right, busy day there where you are. Willie James Inman, thanks so much for that. All right, let's bring in CBS News senior business and technology correspondent Jolene Kent. Jolene, thank you for being with us. Where are Americans really going to feel the impact of these tariffs the most, do you think?
Well, it really depends on what is rolled out at the White House this afternoon. But we do know, of course, those auto tariffs, that 25%, are scheduled to hit this week. So you can expect that car parts, imported cars will be affected. In addition, the secondary, sort of bounce effect, if you will, on the used car market. If new cars get more expensive, then of course used car demand will go up. That price is likely to also rise as well.
And Jolene, the price of groceries played a huge role in this year's election, or last year's election, I should say. What about the dinner table? Is there going to be any impact there because of these reciprocal tariffs?
Look, there are so many parts of the dinner, breakfast, lunch that they're manufactured overseas, right? We're talking about spices, cocoa, all kinds of different things. And what we know is, according to a major food industry group, we're talking about the Consumer Brands Association. I want to get this right. I'm looking at my notes. They represent big brands like Conagra, Mondelez, PepsiCo, for example. They have asked the White House a few weeks ago that they hope that tariffs will deliver what they call maximal impact without undue consequences on consumers as well as manufacturers. So the idea here is they're saying that given the supply chain, given where they are with bringing goods into the United States, so much of that supply chain is already, quote, sort of tapped out. And so the possibility of having more expensive goods, essentially, that likely would be passed on to consumers, impacting the price you pay for a lot of the things at the dinner table. But of course, we're still looking for those exact details on which countries, what type of tariffs will be actually levied this afternoon from the president. But when you talk about the dinner table, of course, major inflation that continues to be quite stubborn and sticky at this point, continues to hit people's pocketbooks, and budgets are tighter than ever. And that you compound that with the likely impact on car insurance, the increased cost of car repairs, for example, all of these monthly costs likely to go up depending on the type of tariff that President Trump announces and the type of tariffs he announces today at the White House.
And how quickly do you think consumers are going to feel the pain from all of this? I mean, if I went out to buy a car tomorrow, am I automatically going to be paying more?
Look, it will take time to hit the consumer, but you are correct in saying that the tariffs do go into effect this week for autos. And so when you're thinking about buying a car and you're thinking about even a used car and the secondary impact of the pricing on that, you can expect movement to start pretty soon. Of course, dealerships are going to have to deal with pricing in terms of the new supply that's coming in. But from what we understand, prices are likely, according to economic experts, to go up due to these auto tariffs. And so many parts are produced overseas and then imported into the country to be used for those auto repairs, for example. And so this is actually adding sort of more insult to injury when it comes to pricing, according to a lot of experts. What we know is that overall car insurance, for example, and car repairs over the past 5 years have gone up on average, say you had a $100 car premium, for example, in 2020. That's already costing on average $120 now. So that pinch you're already feeling, and then you can expect to feel more as tariffs hit in terms of these auto tariffs.
All right, I want to pivot to TikTok because the clock is ticking, pun intended. They have to make a deal by April 5th or they're going to get the boot. A lot of people make their living on TikTok. Are they going to get a deal?
The White House, according to our CBS News scoop from Jennifer Jacobs and Sarah Cook, the deal is supposed to be presented to the president today. A group of buyers that could include any number of parties, including Blackstone and Oracle. We also saw a new New York Times report today that says Amazon has thrown their hat into the ring. Amazon, when we reached out, is declining to comment on that report. But TikTok appears to be heading for a deadline with a deal in sight, but the specifics of that deal and how it actually satisfies the law in terms of national security, it remains to be seen. And so we might hear from the president this afternoon when he talks about tariffs, also about the TikTok situation. We'll be staying tuned. But as for that deadline, it is indeed April 5th, barreling towards another deadline. You'll remember back in January, TikTok was taken offline for about 14 hours. We'll see if that happens again.
All right, Jolene Kent, thank you so much. Always great to be with you. Let's bring in Anthony Salvanto now. He is the Executive Director of Elections and Surveys for CBS News. Anthony, I love talking to you, and I'd be really curious to see what you have found. You've been crunching the numbers. How America is reacting to the administration's plans and all these tariffs. How are folks feeling?
Hey there, Liz. Great to talk to you. So the quick answer to that is they're worried because they think that tariffs are going to make prices go up. So you do find a majority of Americans in general are opposed to the idea. But let me unpack the why for you. I asked, what do you think will happen to prices both in the short term, and I got big majorities, 3/4 really, thinking that will increase prices. But, the administration's argument is also that in the long term, this will be beneficial. Well, I asked about that too, and there's still a bulk of folks who think that tariffs will increase prices in the long term. Now, why is that important? Well, politically, one of the things we've seen is that people think that the Trump administration isn't focused enough, and I'm going to circle this not enough part here, on lowering prices. That is important because you'll recall Donald Trump won the 2024 election in large part because people thought that he would either lower prices or make them financially better off, right? But compare that to the majority over here that thinks that he's spending too much time focusing on tariffs. And that all connects back to, does Donald Trump own this economy? The answer to that is not quite yet, but he's sort of getting there. He shares some of the responsibility for inflation with Joe Biden in the public mind, but his policies are there, and one has to watch going forward as these tariffs take effect. If they do have an effect on prices, then does that start to move the needle? A little, he's been ticking down. Does it move it even more on how he's handling the economy, Liz?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch with all of this. All right, Anthony Salvanto, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for being on our show. All right, coming up, it's over. Corruption charges dropped against New York Mayor Eric Adams, but not without a scathing statement from the judge. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Let's get back to some of that breaking news out of New York City. The judge overseeing Mayor Eric Adams' corruption case agreed to the Justice Department's request to drop those charges. He said he did so with prejudice, meaning Adams cannot be retried on the same charges at a later time. CBS News correspondent Chanel Call joins us now. Chanel, do we know what went into this decision to drop these charges?
Well, there is a 78-page long report that the judge had laid out his opinion and order in. And in it, he said some will undoubtedly find today's decision unsatisfying. What's interesting here is the case was dismissed, you mentioned, with prejudice, which essentially means the Department of Justice is now permanently barred from retrying Mayor Eric Adams on the same charges. We heard from Mayor Eric Adams just moments ago, earlier this hour. He responded to his case being dropped, and he called this justice.
Let me be clear. As I've said all along, this case should have never been brought. And I did nothing wrong. I'm now happy that our city can finally close the book on this and focus solely on the future of our great city. I want to thank New Yorkers who stood by my side, who prayed for me, who supported me from day one.
So again, Mayor Adams maintaining his innocence as in this case, as he has been all along. He was also seen later in that five-minute address holding up a book called Government Gangsters, written by now FBI Director Kash Patel. We should note the timing here really interesting. This dismissal comes about 2 months after the Trump administration first sought to drop the case. You'll remember that, of course, was a very controversial move. 7 federal prosecutors actually quit in protest when the DOJ had asked federal prosecutors to drop the case. And Justice Department officials had said, look, the prosecution in this case is essentially challenging Mayor Eric Adams' ability to support the Trump administration's mass deportation plans.
All right, CBS News correspondent Chanel Call. Thank you so much, Chanel. Great to see you. All right, let's take a live look now at Chicago and Dallas. Two major cities across the Midwest and the Southwest are under threat of severe storms, bringing the risk of damaging winds, hail, and a chance of tornadoes. I want to bring in Jessica Birch. Talk a little bit about this storm and how sweeping it is.
You know, what's interesting about earlier this week, we know that we were dealing with very similar storms down into the south, right? But that was a fast-moving system. The difference from earlier this week's storms and now is this one's going to linger a lot longer over the exact same areas. So not only are we concerned about tornado activity and the damaging winds, like you mentioned, we're also concerned about those storms just sitting directly over cities and just allowing for such heavy amounts of rain to fall. I mean, anywhere from 10 to 15 inches of rain is expected in certain cities. And so it's important to note that flooding is going to be a very big concern with this system moving in. Let's dive into that right now. We take a quick look at the map where that system's going. As we head into the afternoon and evening hours tonight, these widespread thunderstorms stretch over anywhere from Chicago all the way down into Dallas, like we just saw. But another thing to mention, too, on the back end of it, there's areas like western parts of Kentucky and Tennessee, northern portions of Arkansas, just along the Mississippi. That's where I'm really concerned right now when it comes not only to the damaging winds and tornado activity, like I mentioned, but of course that heavy amount of rain that's going to fall into the coming hours. Now let's take a quick look at where that storm system's at. Just within the past 12 hours, it's moved pretty fast actually across Missouri, over just north of Arkansas. But now as we head into the afternoon hours today, we keep our eyes very fixated. I mean, widespread throughout all these areas, but you don't see this often, this high risk in this pink color sitting directly over these states, with our severe weather outlook showing northern portions of Arkansas getting hit with very strong winds this afternoon. That thunderstorm activity means that we could see large hail on top of that. And of course, tornadoes are a very big concern, especially in those low-lying areas of western Tennessee and of western Kentucky. Now, we take a quick look at the timeline of this. Watch how it sits over these states. As it continues to try to move to the east into our Wednesday evening, early Thursday morning forecast, we're not letting up of the rain just yet. That's the exact reason why this rainfall outlook that I'm about to show you shows anywhere up to around 10 to 15 inches of rain just over these states. So big concern right now for places like St. Louis, all the way over into Nashville, Tennessee, too. We're going to monitor that closely as we head into the coming days, into this weekend, and all the way into Sunday, too.
Yeah, those folks just keep getting hit week after week. They have this severe weather, it feels like.
It's very active already this season.
All right, Jess, thanks so much. Well, from the Midwest to Capitol Hill, where the CEO of Boeing is testifying in front of the Senate Commerce Committee. He is facing questions on how the company is addressing safety and production issues. Also a big topic of discussion, no surprise, tariffs. The hearing comes just before President Trump's tariff announcement from the Rose Garden, just a couple of hours. Boeing, by the way, is the nation's largest exporter. So let's go to CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, great to see you. What have we learned from this hearing so far?
Well, as you mentioned, Liz, the idea of the president's tariff announcement is touching pretty much every industry, or every industry is asking questions about what kind of impact it will have, and Boeing is no different. The Boeing CEO at this testimony today mentioned that 80% of its exports are 80% of its business are exports to outside the U.S. So any sort of reciprocal tariffs could have an impact on their business and manufacturing and jobs. So that's an element here. The biggest point of focus at this hearing, of course, has been plane safety. You may remember about a year ago that door blew off a Boeing airplane. A few years before that, you had 2 Boeing plane crashes. And so the point of today is addressing the safety components of the Boeing aircraft and just making sure that consumers can be safe to fly. That was the bottom line that the CEO was saying. But I would also note, however, that aside from this hearing, this is the committee that has also had oversight into that crash that happened earlier this year at DCA. You'll remember that Black Hawk colliding with a commercial airplane. And Ted Cruz, who chairs this committee of jurisdiction, started out this hearing by making note that they have not gotten the information that they have requested from the U.S. Army as to why exactly and how that Black Hawk aircraft was flying so closely to a commercial one. So those are some outstanding questions that are coming to this committee. And I mention all of that because there is this big question that consumers have across the country about whether the planes they're flying on are safe.
Yeah, a lot of questions there, no question about that. Lots of questions. Other questions. Shifting gears to Senator Cory Booker's record-breaking speech on the Senate floor. Democrats have faced frustration in some of their town halls recently for not going toe-to-toe with Trump. So what's the verdict on this? Was this the answer to some of those criticisms?
Yeah, he stood for about 25 hours in that chamber, breaking a record for the longest speech in the Senate. What's significant here is that, we've been talking about these town halls across the country as they pertain to Republicans, but there's also been a very intense, anger among the Democratic base that lawmakers on Capitol Hill or party leaders in general just aren't doing enough, in their view, to fight back against this administration. And so there are very limited ways that lawmakers on the Hill who are part of the Democratic Party can exert any leverage. They're in the minority. They can't do much to stop legislation or stop nominees from going through, but they're trying to show at least that they are doing something. And Cory Booker's way was to quite literally stand up for the entire time. Now, he's been able to raise a lot of money. My email inbox has been full of fundraising pitches surrounding this. So the intention of this is to really try to galvanize the Democratic Party base, to raise some money, and to also to show this is one thing that I can do, at least at this point. Will it make a difference? Who knows? It's not likely to change anything within the Trump administration, to say the least. But again, going to the party base as a way to galvanize them, that was really the goal here.
Yeah. Well, a group of Senate Republicans were learning today, Caitlin, they're meeting with the president today at the White House. Any word on the purpose of these discussions today?
That's right, and they just actually returned back to the Hill after this meeting. Senate Republicans are met with the president to talk about how to move forward on this budget resolution that would include the president's top priorities, especially when it comes to taxes and extending the Trump tax cuts and other big items that he wants to tackle through Congress. There's a lot he's been able to do unilaterally through executive order, but there are many things that he wants to do as part of his agenda that need to go through Congress. And several weeks ago, the House passed a budget resolution, essentially a framework saying here is how we're going to tackle this, cutting spending, but also instituting some of the president's agenda items. The Senate still needs to pass their the combined version of that. And so they're expecting to release some language later today, and they basically want to make sure they are on the same page as the president to be able to keep the party together to move forward with this. The important thing is, once they get through this whole process and start actually writing the legislation that goes with this, they're trying to do this through a way that is filibuster proof, that can only get through with Republican votes. So that is going to be the trick here.
Yeah, it's a real strategy. All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much. Well, coming up, her husband was deported by mistake, and now he's stuck in a prison in El Salvador. Camila Montoya Valdez speaks to the wife of the Venezuelan migrant who says her husband was just following the rules. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. We are hearing exclusively from the wife of the man who was mistakenly deported to a notorious prison in El Salvador. He was on one of those planes full of migrants deported without due process last month, even though he'd been given protected immigration status by a judge back in 2019. The White House claims he is a dangerous criminal, but they provided no evidence to that. His wife told CBS News' Camila Montoya Galvez he was just trying to follow the rules.
I waited and waited. He never made that call.
Jennifer says when her husband, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, was detained and mistakenly deported by immigration authorities in March, he told her he could be sent to Secot, the notorious Salvadorian prison.
I was scared. I was very scared.
Why?
Because I've seen news of that prison, and I knew they take criminals there, and my husband's not a criminal.
Abrego Garcia was granted legal status protecting him from deportation back to El Salvador in 2019 because of safety concerns in his home country. Jennifer says he continued to check in with immigration officials until he was stopped by ICE on March 12 in Maryland. Just days later, Jennifer saw this photo of Abrego Garcia inside Sacot.
When I saw it, I immediately broke down because I knew it was him.
What was your biggest fear when you identified him?
I was scared for his life.
In court documents filed Monday, the government said although ICE was aware of his protection from removal, Abrego Garcia was removed to El Salvador because of an administrative error. Now that he's out of the country, officials say they have no jurisdiction to bring him back.
The error that you are referring to was a clerical error. It was an administrative error.
The Trump administration acknowledged the mistake, but defended Abrego Garcia's deportation.
He is a leader in the brutal MS-13 gang, and he is involved in human trafficking.
The White House did not detail any evidence that proves those allegations. Jennifer says her husband is not a gang member, but instead just the proud father of their 5-year-old son with disabilities.
He's not a criminal. My husband is an amazing person, an amazing father.
And that was Camila Valdez reporting there. Our map taking us to Oakland, California, which is home of the 9th busiest container port here in the U.S. Now, since the start of the campaign season, large importers have been preparing for the impact of new tariffs by increasing their shipments. Let's bring in CBS News Bay Area's Veronica Macias from the Oakland Seaport. Veronica, thank you so much for being with us. Port of Oakland primarily deals with imports from Asia. So what's the impact been like there?
That's what I'm told by the maritime director this morning, Liz, that the majority of the products coming here, the stuff inside these containers, they are from Asia. And it's just about everything that you can think of, things that we consume in our homes, like furniture, electronics, clothing, car parts, and even the items that manufacturers need here in the U.S. And really just standing here, this is the 9th largest container port in the entire U.S. You can see all those containers, and it gives you really a perspective of just how much product we import in the U.S. So as far as the word of the day being tariffs and how this is going to disrupt trade, well, I'm told by the maritime director here that it's the uncertainty, the need for clarity that's causing the business leaders and investors to kind of put a pause on some things and request a lower volume of product out here. But take a listen to the immediate impacts he says are going to happen.
In the short term, the impact is going to be lower volume. So there's going to be lower amount of goods imported into the country. Once the certainty is, established and tariffs are known, then the volume will continue, and there will be a balance regained.
So the last time I'm told that there were tariffs enacted was back in 2018, and there was very little disruption to trade back then. But that's also, it could be that they fared well here at the Port of Oakland because it's considered a balanced port, meaning there's 50% of imports and also 50% of exports. So in the time being, until there's new contracts, Liz, for agreements on products to be traded here, after those contracts are expired, 100% of the price increase is going to the consumers like you and me.
So what items are we talking about here that come through that port where you're standing every day or every week that are probably going to go up in price?
Everything you could think of, right? Things that we use in our homes, like the appliances we purchase, the electronics. We know that there's going to be a tariff on what's considered to be the brain of electronics, on the semiconductors, also on auto parts and items that are used by manufacturers here. So there's a lot of things. And like I said, just by looking at the containers here, it kind of gives you an idea that everything we, put our hands on is sometimes import. imported. But the good news here, again, is that 50% of the items also being exported to other countries. So we know that this is a reciprocal tariff. So until we hear more from the president later today in the Rose Garden, will there be the clarity that's needed when it comes to these tariffs and how it's going to impact the everyday consumer?
Every single item on those big ships coming through the San Francisco Bay is going to be impacted by all of this. Veronica Macia is live for us at the Port of Oakland. Thank you so much, Veronica. All right, are you having trouble tracking these tariffs and what they really mean for your wallet? Don't worry, we've got you. Coming up, we'll show you an easy way to track how much more you could actually be paying. You're watching CBS News 24/7. CBS News is tracking the cost of products most impacted by tariffs imposed now and soon to be imposed by President Trump, from the cost of common grocery items to cars and trucks. So let's bring in John Kelly, CBS News' Vice President of Data Journalism. John, great to be with you. Tell us about these prices and what kind of trends are we seeing? Let's start with imported fruits and veggies.
Well, as we know, the cost of produce, fresh fruits and vegetables, has been rising for the past several years and putting a lot of pressure on people's pocketbooks and their grocery bill already. And that's been pre-tariff. For instance, an avocado that you could get for $1 about 4 years ago is typically now $2 to $2.50, depending on where you live. And that's, again, before we get into this phase where tariffs are going to be imposed and potentially higher tariffs are going to be imposed. And it'll be interesting to see. And one of the things we want to be able to do is track in real time, week to week, from the Agriculture Department, which surveys grocery stores' prices. We want to be able to see what happens so that we can more definitively answer the questions about the kind of additional pressure that tariffs put on people's grocery bill.
Yeah, it's interesting to see those line items, how much more apples are going to cost, how much more asparagus and avocados, as you mentioned. I want to ask you about cars, though. A lot of people concerned it's going to be a lot more expensive to buy a car. What's the data saying?
Similarly, we're waiting to see what's going to happen with the tariffs themselves, but we've already, as we have with a lot of things in the economy, seen this incredible pressure on prices. So for like a new car that you might have paid, a typical small SUV 4 years ago, 5 years ago, right around the beginning of 2020, might have cost you about $30,000. That same car last month would have cost you at least $36,000, $38,000 even. And that's, again, before these tariffs are imposed on either foreign cars or even cars that many of us think of as American made, but that include a lot of foreign parts that will be subject or could be subject to the tariffs that are under consideration. And those parts, it's a ripple effect through the car economy. It means used cars cost more as the supply is affected. If you need to buy a part for your car or you need to pay a repair service to fix your car, those parts are going to cost more and repairs are going to potentially be impacted in that. So we talked a little bit about, if you had a car accident and you had $2,000, a repair that would have cost you $2,000 5 years ago, you could be looking at $2,800 now. And that's before these tariffs are imposed on most of our, automobile parts that your repair person is ordering. Where those are typically being manufactured in countries that could be subject to these new tariffs.
Yeah, it's going to be a real shock to the system and the wallets. What are you saying about the cost of raw materials?
The home builders have been talking about this for several years. We had supply chain interruptions and inflation that had already put pressure on a lot of those items. And there were some earlier tariffs in the first Trump administration, and some of which were kept through the Biden administration, that these new tariffs might add to. But things like aluminum, lumber, steel, drywall are all costing significantly more than they were 5 years ago. And that could be further aggravated at a time when home prices are already high. And on top of that, interest rates are also putting additional pressure on people trying to buy a home or perhaps upgrade and move, from the home they're in to try to improve on, the home that they have. Every new home that's built, there have been estimates are already, 25% or more expensive to build. And that's before these additional tariffs, which from what we've been told and what economists are talking about and expecting from the administration, is likely to target a lot of these raw materials.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the impact this eventually will have on the construction industry if people start delaying those projects because it's just too expensive.
And that's what we want to be able to track going forward, so that as we're having this discussion, it's not a he said, she said about what the impacts of the tariffs were or what has happened to prices, but that people can really look and see 3 months and 6 months and 12 months from now what's happened to prices in some of these areas where we've imposed these penalties.
Yeah, the numbers don't lie. John Kelly, CBS News Vice President of Data Journalism. Thank you so much, John. Great to see you.
Thanks.
Well, coming up, nice to see you, John. Well, coming up, remembering a true movie star. We look back at the life and legacy of Val Kilmer. Stay with us. Well, you might want to check your driver's license. In just over a month, you could have a harder time getting through airport security. May 7th is the final deadline to have that real ID, and millions of Americans still don't have it. CBS News' Chris Van Cleve is at Washington's Reagan National Airport with what you need to know.
Folks, make sure you have your documents out ready to go.
It's an all-out effort to beat the clock that has lines out the door in Chicago. With only about 33% compliance statewide, Illinois opened this first-in-the-nation Real ID Supercenter last month in an old Walgreens location. It's processing about 1,500 people a day.
Come on around. All that empty space over there.
Starting May 7th, you'll need a Real ID to get into government buildings and through airport security. What made you come in today?
Because I have a trip coming up May 10th, so I want to get it out the way.
I had to get the Real ID because I work in a government building, and I guess we can't get in without that.
This really is an effort to make up for lost time in Illinois. They want to move people through in about an hour from document check to photo to paperwork processing to checkout. But that Real ID will come in the mail in about 2 weeks. That's why time is running out. Congress mandated the switch to Real ID after 9/11.
Can you see your ID for a second?
The new IDs are more secure and harder to counterfeit. After lengthy delays, the deadline is now just weeks away.
We are told that it's going to happen.
TSA spokesperson Patricia Mancha.
Everybody is responsible for presenting the proper travel documents when they come to the checkpoint.
What happens if people don't have a compliant ID on May 7th?
Well, there's going to be a phased approach of enforcement, but people will experience travel delays.
Getting one means a trip to the DMV. Typically, you'll need a valid ID, passport, or birth certificate, proof of your social security number and date of birth, plus 2 items proving state residency. The deadline for enforcement is May 7th, but you'll still be able to get a Real ID after that deadline. The TSA has not laid out what that phased enforcement will look like, but if you have a passport or an active military ID, those will also work in the meantime. Chris Van Cleve, CBS News, Reagan National Airport.
All right, from Washington to the Midwest, where major cities are under threat of severe storms. I'm going to bring Jessica Birch back in. Okay, we're going to see everything. Hail, possibly, well, thunderstorms, we know that, snow, and then maybe even tornadoes.
Tornado activity, damaging winds, the whole thing. Very similar to what the South saw. And those live photos behind us, they're from Louisville right now in Kentucky, where they're going to see heavy amounts of rain into the coming days, Liz. So let's dive into the map real fast. Throughout this afternoon and heading into the evening hours tonight, you take a look in areas like the western parts of Kentucky and all the way over into western parts of Tennessee, close to Nashville too. We could see anywhere up to around 10 to 15 inches of rain from today into this weekend's forecast from this exact same system. So take a look behind me. Here's where it's at right now. We are gearing up for some heavy storms, widespread, anywhere from Kansas, now moving its way over Missouri, and now making its way over into areas like Chicago, Illinois, as we head into the afternoon hours today. Now, this is something you don't see often. Our severe weather outlook showing that high risk in a very wide-stretched area. Mind you, this severe weather will impact over 70 million Americans, with a possibility for tornadoes, strong winds, and of course large hail, especially associated just in these areas closer to western parts of Tennessee, where tornado activity is easily possible in those low-lying areas, about a 30% risk just into this afternoon alone. So you watch this storm really unfurl as we head into the evening hours tonight. It gains strength into the overnight hours tonight, continues to slowly move its way over Tennessee and Kentucky. And on the back end of it, we're not letting up from the rain just yet over into areas like Arkansas either. So the Mississippi, we could see flooding in these regions all throughout those small creeks. That's going to be a big concern too, with localized flooding. I mean, almost inevitable, because of how much rain we're going to see as we head into this weekend's forecast. Like I said, anywhere up to around 15 inches locally, diving into the next couple days. Back to you, Liz.
All right, Jess, thank you. Well, rescue dogs are bringing some comfort to families in earthquake-ravaged Southeast Asia. Sniffer dogs in Bangkok took a break from searching the collapsed construction site to help ease the emotional toll on families caught up in this disaster.
The dog has amazing powers, and touching a dog really gives some nice relief for people, so it's a good emotional support.
Dogs are amazing, aren't they? Well, we're seeing some of the glimmers of hope, though, today. Some rescuers today pulled 2 men alive from the ruins of a hotel and a third from a guest house 5 days after that earthquake hit. And now this in a live stream this morning, Nintendo announcing a launch date for its latest console, the Switch 2. You can grab the new system on June 5th. And along with the release date, the gaming company also revealed a price tag of $449 or $499 paired with one of its new flagship games, Mario Kart World. Other products and features announced: a Nintendo Switch camera, an easy and long-awaited game chat button to talk smack with your friends. All right, much more ahead here on CBS News 24/7. All eyes at the White House. The Rose Garden is going to be the place where President Trump's going to make his announcement on tariffs. We'll see you there live.